Everybody, thank you so much for coming. It's brilliant that you are spending your Tuesday evening with us, the start of the evening here, and welcome to Talking Trusted Teaching and a focus tonight on the Standard for Middle Leadership and Political Insight. I am Pauline Stephen, the Chief Executive and Registrar at the General Teaching Council for Scotland, and I am joined today by Alison Mitchell. And Alison is the head teacher in residence at the University of Glasgow's School of Education. Maybe Alison can wave, or does that not work quite like that, Fraser? Can we all see Alison? There we go. Hey, there's Alison. So we'll be speaking to Alison shortly. And we are also joined by my colleague here at GTCS, Asif Shiste, who is a Teaching Standards Education Officer. And there's Asif. So we three are delighted to welcome you here. What we've gathered tonight for has we've got some particular things that we think people could get out of this gathering together, what the aims of getting together really are. We really hope that you can deepen your connection with this particular professional standard, the Standard for Middle Leadership. But also we hope that it goes some way to help us grow identity as a middle leader and what that means in Scottish education, particularly now in this moment of time that we find ourselves in. But we also want to provide an opportunity for you to connect and collaborate with each other. We see that networking and getting to know people who do similar work, who think about similar things, who are working and looking at the same standards, really helps that collective enhancement of what it means to be a teacher and a middle leader and what teaching standards say about all of that. I thought I'd just give a little bit of context about where GTC Scotland rather, sits in what I'm going to call the political landscape, given that this is a session where we are deeply looking at political insight. If you have had the opportunity to speak with some of our events before, you will know that I sometimes describe the Scottish education system a bit like a hilly Scottish landscape, where we all have hills that we are there to look after and do our best for, but that we are connected in this broader landscape. And I'm obviously speaking to you from the GTC Scotland Hill, and I very much realise that sometimes I need to leave my hill, go and visit some others, see what's going on, see what the world looks like from the world of the middle leader in Scottish education. And I think it's important for you too, from time to time, to visit our hill, to come to GTC Scotland. And I really hope that this middle leadership event will be a really great opportunity to more deeply connect back with what it means to be a middle leader and what the standards are there to do. And the GTC Scotland Hill's quite an old hill. We've been around since 1965. So next year, 60 years of that regulatory framework being in place for the teaching profession. And whereas sometimes we can be seen as probably quite a solitary hill, we've got quite a unique function, nobody else does what we do, but we are connected across this landscape. And our hill probably too has changed significantly over recent years. We now have 81,000 teachers on our register. And in recent years, we've welcomed both teachers from the independent school sector and college lecturers to the register. But the core of what we're about has remained the same: professional standards, a code of professionalism and conduct, entry standards, and becoming a teacher being rooted in professional education, being rooted in university level study, an ongoing commitment to learning, and professional-led regulation, all of which having high standards at the core, all of that. High standards that we think that we should take collective pride in, and that's our message of trusted teaching. And we enjoy taking that message, and we think it's important to do so to all the other hills in our landscape, including the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament. And you as middle leaders will, of course, sit on your own hill, that of your school, your cluster, your learning community, and you need navigation around about this landscape that we share together. So schools probably need what we would call pioneers who understand how that landscape connects, who are able to go out to other hills and bring back useful resources. You are in a school, part of a community, that community that places trust in teachers, relying on us to interpret what is right and wrong, keep learners safe, and be positive role models. And likewise, our teachers and head teachers trust in their middle leaders to understand and interpret policy, use the tools offered and imposed by others in our landscape efficiently in their own context. And I imagine that sometimes those tools don't feel like they'll always fit, and that they're maybe even designed to weigh you down or create some obstacles. And that is where we think having knowledge and political insight is helpful to aid you to see how you can apply policies to your context. How do they explore and look for your particular situation? And it is not an easy task. And it's our belief that the Standard for Middle Leadership provides middle leaders and teachers who aspire to leadership positions with a way to navigate the landscape, to reflect upon unique challenges and opportunities of their role, and really help that navigation with up-to-date equipment and tools at your disposal. And in this case, for what we're discussing tonight, political insight. So I've mixed my metaphors too much already. I've talked about hills. Alison and Asif, I know, talked about the engine room in their video that hopefully you've had the chance to watch before you've joined us tonight. And I've mentioned navigator and pioneer to that list as well. So probably just reflecting how adaptable and flexible middle leaders are. So what do we know about the Standard for Middle Leadership? We know that there's an expectation that middle leaders and aspiring leaders have a strong grasp of political power and influence in order to enhance outcomes for learners. And really by gaining the knowledge and critical understanding of the dynamics of political power and influence, aligning with professional values, sharing those insights with colleagues and supporting learning contexts. So one of the ways that we, GCS, seek to enhance trust in the profession is to provide space like this, to hold space to discuss these topical issues with events like this webinar. So I'm going to bring in Alison and Asif now, and we're going to start to explore some of those themes around political insight. And I've mentioned before that Alison is head teacher in residence, University of Glasgow School of Education. And Alison, you teach on the Into Headship programme as well. So I'm sure that there may be people on the call who have come into your sphere of knowledge and influence through that. And you're also part of the School of Education's Future of Headship Research and Writing team. So Alison's lots of experience and I think 30 years experience in secondary education, although that is amazing, including 11 as a head teacher. So delighted that Alison is joining us. And Asif is a member of the GTC Scotland team. Asif joined us in 2022. I'm going to check I've got my dates right. And among other engagement work, Asif has been really instrumental in a publication which you can find on our website, the Sponsoring for Diversity in the Teaching Profession report, which we published earlier this year, which is really important work. And before joining us, Asif spent 12 years as a principal teacher of modern languages. So Alison, would you like to say hello to everybody? That might be a nice way to start.
Hello, thank you very much, Pauline, and thank you for inviting me along this evening. Great to see so many people on the call. I can see by the numbers and the little bar at the top, and just delighted, as always, to be working with middle leaders who are a kind of tremendous group of influencers in education.
Great. It's great to have you, Alison. We really appreciate you being part of our conversation. Asif, would you want to tell everybody how you're doing?
Doing very well, very glad to be here and to start the discussion today. And you mentioned the video where Alison and I had started talking about the importance of middle leadership and this part of the standards. Just to put everyone's mind at ease, if you've not had the chance to watch that video yet, don't worry, because we'll be covering many of those points in our discussion today and recovering that.
Great. And you can get access to that video on our website, can't you, and get caught up with that if we pique your interest so much that you want to go and see what Asif and Alison were getting up to in their conversation. So let's start off with this sort of I'm going to say overarching, but slightly huge question also. What is political insight? And why is it important in middle leadership? So Alison, you are our guest. So let us start with you. What is political insight from your point of view, and why is it important for middle leaders?
Okay, thank you, Pauline. So for me, political insight is understanding and critique of policy, understanding the political powers and influences that shape the policy that we are required to embed and to implement in our contexts. It's also about understanding what is policy in terms of law, what is policy in terms of guidance or frameworks, and what are we required to do, and what influence or what flexibility do we have. I think we all, as leaders, have moments where our moral compass is spinning, and often these moments come when we are required to implement something that doesn't align with our values. The standards very much talk about values, they talk about social justice, and they talk in middle leadership around that ethical use of your influence and responsibility under trust and respect. And to do leadership ethically, we need to be critiquing where policy doesn't support the ethical and the social justice work that we want to do. So that awareness, that understanding of what are the influencers on policy, who are the voices that have been kind of heard in terms of policy creation, and whose interests are the policies created in, and how do they support or undermine my role as a middle leader in terms of the ethical responsibility that I have for children and young people in my school, in my establishment, and also the ethical responsibility that I have for leadership of the staff and their development as professionals. And when things start kind of jarring or start kind of undermining your values-led leadership, you need to look at kind of what it is that's happening there and have the confidence and I think the knowledge and the awareness to critique the policies that don't support what you believe to be the purpose of education.
Thanks, Alison. And I noted your use of the word ethical lots through that. And there is something fundamentally just to recognise together, I think, that teaching, whatever role you're in, is that role of authority, trust, responsibility, and arguably power. So that all needs to be wrapped around values, ethics, and doing things in the right way. So what about you? What's your view about what political insight actually means and why it's so important for middle leaders?
Yeah, so I work in the education standards team in GTC Scotland, so it won't surprise you that I'm going to start with the standard itself and what it says. So it talks about the dynamics of political power, and in my mind that equates with who the power holders are in Scottish education and who are the people who develop policy. And it points us to kind of three areas to think about. So the first is thinking about where our school or learning community sits in a community and in a society and how that relates to power and political dynamics. It also makes us reflect on the link between political insight and our professional values, and most especially the professional value of social justice. So it's one of our professional values alongside integrity and trust and respect. So we're encouraged to examine that dotted line between political insight and social justice. And finally, it tells us to examine our own middle leadership and the work of our own school or learning community and how it interplays with political insight and political power. And in my discussion with Alison, we were talking about a provocation which Professor Rowena Arshad had offered the teaching profession through an event at GTC Scotland about political insight. And she remarked that for some people, for some teachers, the word political with a small p can be off-putting. So I want to be practical and helpful and try and kind of break down that word political. So we did a bit of word association, and I had 3 words. I've got a 4th one now. So the first thing I would say before moving on to that would be that I think that political is something different to politicized. And I think we have to accept that education is politicized by lots of different people because it's such an important thing. But just because as a middle leader, I use political insight to help me make a decision with my colleagues, that doesn't mean that that decision is a political decision just because I've used the insight to help me get there. So my 4 keywords of word association are firstly power, who has got it, what are they doing with it, and perhaps a more provocative question is, as a middle leader, am I happy about that, or do I want to seek to have more of that power myself or distribute it with others? Influence, a second really important word. We've talked a lot about how influential middle leaders are, but perhaps another reflection question is, where and when do middle leaders want to seek to get more influence? Where do they want to expend their energy in exerting that influence? Policy would be my 3rd word, because it, for me, is the mechanism by which decisions are realised. And I think the middle leaders have to be really engaged and interested in policy writing and in policy development. And the final word which I've added since my chat with Alison is trust, because I think that people will, for us to be successful in our decision making and using political insight, we have to have the trust of our colleagues, of learners, and of others involved in education. And that happens when people know that our trust is rooted in knowledge and understanding, in skills and ability. And it also happens when leaders have got the courage to say, we've maybe not got this right this time, and this is how we're going to make amends, this is how we're going to remedy the situation. And finally, so why is it important for middle leaders? Well, because middle leaders are so influential, and I use the expression with Alison, they're the influencers par excellence of the education system. And I don't mean influencers like the folk that are on YouTube who arguably don't really have a proper job. I'm talking about proper, meaningful influence in enhancing the experience of learners.
Thanks, Asif. And I am delighted that you managed to get the modern languages teacher out of you by using par excellence. That was very, very exciting. So these are interesting words. Thank both of you. Let's look at that power word a little bit more, shall we? Because I think sometimes perhaps people don't always see it as a positive word. They use it in contexts where they maybe are unhappy about the distribution of power. I think too, there is potentially still some differences of view about the use of the word empowerment, which we know has been a Scottish policy word, isn't it? And some people have some different views about whether it's an appropriate word, if it feels like you're still being given something, so you don't really have, you're being empowered rather than actually using your power as a professional teacher and middle leader well. Let's talk about power to make policy. So what's the role of middle leaders, do we think, in making policy? So as well as interpreting policy that's around them, what's their power to make it themselves? Asa, do you want to kick off with that one? Because power was your word, and then we'll come to Alison.
Yeah, so it's good the question is about making and interpreting policy, because I don't see the role of middle leaders as always a situation where they're given tablets of stone, where a policy has come along and they're told, right, you go and make the magic happen now, you get that to the enactment stage. I think it really is important that middle leaders are involved in the development stage as well. And of course, that relies on others. That relies on the willingness of others to distribute and share their influence and their power. But the role of middle leader is really critical in policy development, because the role of middle leader is very connected and it's very circular. So it's connected because middle leaders work in several different spheres. They have their own sphere with their colleagues, and perhaps they lead a team or a department. And then they have their sphere where they're working with the senior leadership team and externally with parents and other community members as well. And that circularity and that connectedness gives them a really unique role, I think, a uniquely powerful role in Scottish education. I know it doesn't always feel like that. Of course it doesn't. There can be frustrations there. And they can look at a policy and how it's enacted in their area, how it's enhanced to its best fruition, but they can also step back and see the bigger picture. I think that's very characteristic of middle leaders, being able to look at the bigger picture and maybe in a whole school context, for example, as well. I think a key part of developing policy is using that unique power of the middle leader responsibly. And middle leaders do that by applying their professional judgment. And I think that goes back to what we're talking about with trust as well. That's very intertwined with trust. And that professional judgment, again, I think is something that is very rooted in our expertise and our knowledge and understanding and our skills and ability.
Thanks, Asif. A couple of models that sprung into my head as you were speaking there were understanding that the role of a middle leader takes place in a vertical and a horizontal space. You know, that sort of engagement with the people in your team who report to you and who you report to, but also that horizontal layer of the other middle leaders in your context and how you work. They're part of a different multiple team identities, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And also, obviously, I was thinking about the hill as you were speaking. Sometimes we speak about in GTCS, when you're stuck in a problem, going back up the hill a little bit, just going back up to get a slightly broader view in order to apply that political insight in the creation of policy. What about you, Alison? Was what Asif said striking home for you in terms of that making and interpreting policy role for middle leaders?
Absolutely. Middle leaders make policy every day. You make hopefully wise and ethical judgments around how you are going to develop people, how you are going to organise learning and teaching in your faculties or in your stages if you're in primary school. And I probably think that you have more power than you think. And where policy is not meeting the needs of those in your establishment or department, then the whole political insight comes around you questioning that and then using your voice to change that. And just some of the things that I can think about are around, you know, in secondary school presentation policies for SQA examinations that are absolutely not about children, but they are about numbers. And where that's happening, what do you do about that? Do you question it? And I think the more political insight you have, the more influence and power you will have, because you will know the right questions to ask. You will know what you need to challenge. And I think in terms of, you know, how you're leading other people, you want people to be challenging you as well, because you're influencing those that you lead. You're influencing their development as professionals. So the influence and power you have over other people's livelihoods is really enormous. So that's something that kind of exists at middle leadership level. And also when I was head teacher, I really liked being challenged too. So I ensured that the middle leaders had a voice. And if they came and asked me, well, why are we doing this? I don't think it aligns with our school values. And if I couldn't give them an answer about why I'm doing it, then something had to change there. So it's about using that. It's about being courageous, but you will be more courageous the more insight and knowledge you will have, because you will be a credible leader that understands policy, that understands what isn't working, and therefore can use your voice in a more influential way. But really, what you said, Asif, really aligns with me as well. And just and middle leaders for me I've been fortunate enough, you know, to work with amazing middle leaders and to appoint amazing middle leaders. But the responsibility I felt was on me to ensure that they were supported, but also on them to ensure that they challenged me.
Thanks, Alison. There's
Stop there
something
just now.
deep. Thank you. There's something deeply cultural in what you talk about. You know, what is the culture in which middle leaders can do exactly as you have described and are welcomed, in fact, to do exactly what you have described. I want to ask you both one question before we go and see if anybody else wants to ask you any questions. So, Alison, you were speaking there about middle leaders are not just policy interpreters. They make policy in the moment, in their context. And you were also speaking about the opportunity for middle leaders to influence the policy agenda. And I think lots of teachers would say, you know, I have an issue with this particular policy. How can I influence it? Do you want to say a little bit more about what you think middle leaders can practically do in that space to influence the policy agenda around us? I mean, fundamentally, things like what is education for in the context of exams that you spoke about earlier. I think there's some big challenges around about that.
Thank you. I think it's a great question. And I suppose the influence comes with asking the right questions and asking from a position of knowledge and understanding of how policy is created and for whom and which voices are involved in policy. So it's really looking critically at the policies that we are and the kind of the influences that shape the work that we do in schools. I think the middle leader's job, and actually the school's job, if we're looking at the purpose of education, is around developing a critically conscious school community. And you can do that in a number of ways. And some of the examples that I've talked around in the Enhanced Political Awareness course that we run is around things like, food banks. So we all have food banks in school, but are we actually teaching and asking children to question the reason that food banks exists rather than just having these as an act of charity because people need to eat? So there are things that are happening that we are essentially or potentially blind to. And so the political awareness, the political insight is not just about the middle leader, but it's about the middle leader shaping that insight and that consciousness across those for whom they have influence. And that includes children, it includes staff, it includes all of us in terms of looking at the society that we live in and how oppression exists and is perpetuated and what we can do about that or do to question that. So there is influence there in terms of the communities that we work with in classes and in departments and across our school, and also influence, beyond the school. There are many ways in which we can talk to politicians. We might feel that we are not always involved in Scottish government, and there is kind of consultation fatigue at the moment, although things are starting to change. But the voices of the middle leaders are highly important because you are closest to the children and the young people. And it is about, for me, it's absolutely about questioning, but from a position of knowledge and courage. I don't know if, does that answer your question?
It does. I think I think what you've expressed, Alison, is, as if you spoke about dotted lines between political insight and social justice. And I think what I get a sense from you, Alison, is that very dotted line also from political insight and critically thinking and engagement with ideas and understand. There's a dotted line to being a critically thinking profession as well, isn't there? Yeah.
I think it very much links.
Alison.
I'm just thinking it very much links to the UNCRC that is now, which is wonderful. It's now embedded in Scots law. And to what extent are we able, in terms of the resources that we have from the Scottish Government, to embed each of the articles in the UNCRC that we are obliged to do in terms of law? And if that's not the case, what are we doing about that? And are our children engaged and involved in that? And that is highly political as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Alison. What about you, Asif? Any top tips for influencing the policy agenda?
Yeah, so I'm going to have to think about the how and suggest a model, which I hope is quite a practical thing that people can take away if they've not already thought of it, because there's huge scope for influence among middle leaders, but there can also be frustrations when we don't have the influence that we want to have. And I think that being a middle leader can be a very satisfying role because you feel like you're in the loop, that you're in many ways at the center of things, but the flip side of it can be incredible frustration when you can't affect the change that you want to. And I think a really useful model in those kind of circumstances is the CIA model, which many people on the call might have heard of. which is about control and influence and accept. So it helps us as middle leaders decide where and when we expend our energy and time in trying to exert the influence and the change that we want to. Which areas are there where we already have control and we can easily, or not easily, but with effort, we can affect the change? Where are there areas where we need to work with others and we need the input and the support of others? So that's the influence sphere, and what can I do as a middle leader to persuade? And let's be honest, there are also going to be areas that we just need to accept, that we will have to accept things in brackets for now, and make peace with certain things for a while and then come back to them later on. I think that's also important for the well-being of middle leaders, because that's really critical to how well they do their job.
And not such a bad model to apply, I would argue, as if in other areas of your life. Perhaps, what can you control, influence, and what do you have to accept and just get on with, like your ironing pile, etc. All right then, so let's bring our colleague Fraser in. Fraser is works with us here at GCS. Fraser's a policy officer. And Fraser, you're going to help me by finding people who want to ask questions, aren't you? So over to you.
Absolutely. So if anyone does have any questions they want to ask, if they would want to submit them to the Q&A panel, you should be able to see. In a moment, I'll be asking some of the people that have asked questions previous to the event to come on screen. So that's Richard Galloway, Lilith Johnston and Scott Orkney. We'll be asking each of them to come on camera to ask their questions, but while they're getting their cameras and microphones activated, can I pose another previously submitted question from Anna Hippolito? What opportunities do middle leaders have to impact Scottish educational policy and practice?
So that's a little bit sort of what we were talking about, influencing, isn't it? So I suppose the question relates to our context just now, where we feel that there's lots of perhaps policy development happening. So Alison, anything else you would like to say about influencing Scottish policy?
I suppose in addition to what I mentioned earlier is around networks. And networks such as this, you're here because you are interested in political insight. It is a key part of the standards. And there's that kind of, schools are not measured by the GTCS standards. They're measured by something completely different, which is looking at very different things around what successful schools are. So in terms of the real kind of call for a kind of clearly defined purpose of education, which I think is embedded in the standards, and Pauline knows I'm a big fan of these standards because I use them in my teaching all of the time. Doing that through networks and through voices around speaking up for what is important and what we value as educationalists in terms of making education work for everybody in our contexts. But certainly doing it alone, yes, you can with your networks and your school community, but looking beyond the community in a network such as this is really important.
It's a great idea, Alison. It's that collective voice sometimes, isn't it, that takes forwards. Yeah. Okay, Fraser, shall we ask somebody to join us to ask a question? That'd be great. Oh, we can't hear you, Fraser.
Richard Galloway, you should be able now to turn on your microphone and camera.
Are you there, Richard? Hi.
Yes, I am, and I am
Welcome.
really.
Nice to see
I'm going
you.
to be. Nice to see you. Thank you. I'm going to be really embarrassed here because I haven't got my question in front of me. I've just been running around like an idiot all day.
Don't worry.
And I'm very sorry.
Do not worry. It's great to have you here. And Fraser's got your question, so Fraser can remind you about what your question was. Would that be all right, Richard?
Yeah, of course it would. I was hoping that would be the case.
Yeah.
Happy to do so. So the question submitted was, to what extent is middle leadership development a priority at the different levels, government, authority and school? And in primary schools, what does it look like?
Yeah, so you from primary school, Richard, is that your context?
Yes, I am. Yep, I am. And I'm actually I'm sort of writing a dissertation for my master's on this kind of subject. So I was very...
So you're hoping that we answer it, so that's...
Well, I don't know if we can answer it, but certainly I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts were.
Yeah, so this is about development of principal teachers, particularly in the primary context. As have you got anything that you would wish to offer, Richard, in response?
Yeah, so I think the answer in brief to your question is it's a patchwork. It really is across Scotland, and it probably looks different from one part of Scotland to another. If we start at the national level, certainly our role in that will be encouraging people to engage with the Standard for Middle Leadership, whether they are current middle leaders or whether they are aspiring middle leaders or even earlier, because this is an aspirational standard that people can use to enhance their professionalism and to support professional growth. Of course, nationally, there are also a number of opportunities from, for example, Education Scotland, who have programs for existing and aspiring middle leaders, and really critically, those are cross-referenced against the Standard for Middle Leadership as well, which is really critical. And there are subject networks as well, where there are sometimes subject or curriculum area specific middle leadership development programs. We have also awarded professional recognition to some local authority middle leadership development programs, and those offer an extra opportunity because they can then be twinned, having a middle leadership focus, but also a more localized approach based on the needs of that context. If it's a local authority where their focus is very particularly on bridging the poverty related attainment gap, then there can be links made there as well. Your question was about primary. How does it look in primary? And I suppose part of me makes me reflect on the incredible diversity of primary schools, of the size of them and the nature of them. But a couple of things I would say. One would be that because of usually the smaller size of primary schools, that collegiate working, I think, is really important, and also the nature of the middle leader or even the principal teacher's role within a primary, where there are many primary schools where there may not be a deputy head teacher, there may be a head teacher and then a principal teacher who has a certain role, and that influences the area of the policy that they're most interested with. I think, though, what's really critical is the importance of PRD and the importance of reflecting on the standards. And for that, middle leaders and aspiring middle leaders need time and space to do that, whether in a primary school or any other context. And I think we need to do some deep thinking about how to facilitate that time and space in our education system.
It's a recurring theme, Asif, isn't it, that we've collected for years, Richard, about the pressures on time and space for development. I'm guessing you asked the question, Richard, because perhaps you have a view about, especially in the primary context. What's your view?
Well, I think the more I look into it, the more that is definitely context specific, and it depends whether you're in a rural, a semi-rural, or an urban environment. And so I don't think there's no one answer. And I think the other thing that I've noticed is we talk about distributed leadership, and it really depends on who your leaders are, because you can be the most willing and the most proactive, but if your leader is not interested or unable or feels threatened or whatever it might be, then it becomes very rapidly a thankless task, if you know what I mean.
I do, and I think it speaks to a point Alison made earlier, that we talked about almost the culture and people being open to both learning and development, but also challenge and developing that kind of feedback culture, isn't it? Sorry, Asif, did you want to come back in?
Just really quickly on that? And that's such an interesting and important point that you're making, Richard. And I've talked earlier about the circularity of the role of middle leader. So because I am a middle leader, or you're a middle leader, and you're working collegiately, maybe you have a team, there's also the same question for you as a middle leader. If you want some more of that power or more influence, then what do you do with it? Do you keep it to yourself, or do you then distribute it collegiately or within your area or within your department, or do you decide just to hang on to it? So there's the same question for us as middle leaders.
Yeah, for sure.
Alison, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just a short point. Richard, you're absolutely right. It very much depends on how you are led. And a real example of that is when we, the university and the local authority that we work with, we interview people for into headship. And we always interview more than get in. And these are kind of senior leaders. And we can tell from their interview the culture of their school and to what extent they have a critical stance, to what extent they have engaged in reading and critique and understanding of what underpins policy. And that for me just highlights the responsibility of the leader, whether it's middle leader or head teacher, in developing those skills in those that they lead. And it doesn't always have to be a formal university course or GTC or Education Scotland course. It's about the type of conversations you have and the way that you agree what is a commonly held purpose of education that you hold yourself accountable to, and critique what undermines that aspiration in schools. But absolutely, it's the leader's job to support those who are kind of in their care and who are developing within their school.
Yeah, and I think also then that also speaks to the whole PRD thing, doesn't it? And I was interested. I was interviewed for the study that's been done at Glasgow University, and we had a chat about that. And yeah, it all goes hand in glove, and it comes down to, as Asif was saying, it comes down to time.
Yeah.
You know, and I think,
and taking it seriously, prioritizing it as important, essential to what it means to be and grow as a teacher. Yeah.
You know, and
Thanks,
I think,
Richard.
okay, well, thank you very much. I'll take no more of your time.
No, I'm sorry, I'm rushing you a little bit.
I understand. Yeah,
I'm
sure.
just keen to make sure that Lilith and Scott get the chance to ask their question. Lilith, would you like to come in?
Thank you.
Are you there okay? We can't hear you if you're speaking. Tell you what, Lilith, I'll maybe go on to Scott and then pop back. Scott, are you there? Would you like to ask your question?
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much.
Good.
So my question was about what agency the middle leaders have in leveraging policy with their values. And then I gave an example just of kind of like a live issue. So the example I gave was, it might be argued that there's tensions within early years in primary one in particular when applying play pedagogy policy into practice, and like along with issues such as standardized testing.
I think this is one where we should start with Alison, Scott, because it speaks to some of the things Alison was saying before around about agency and using that to influence and offer critique, I think you said before, Alison.
Thanks, Scott, very much. Great question, and often a tension that kind of creates that dissonance in terms of what we are doing compared to what we believe that we should be doing. And the heads that I work with, and we do some work with early years as well, talk about this and talk about what they feel is right in contrast with often what they are required to do. And looking at that with a critical eye, yes, you need to be looking at play pedagogy based on research that it works, and we're hearing a lot that it does work, but where does that sit in terms of ACEL data? And we probably don't know all of these answers yet, but the more there is critique and discussion within establishments and a commonly agreed kind of purpose of what we are doing in education, the better the decisions will be in terms of what's right for the children and for the young people. You talked about agency, and again, that's links to what I was saying about culture. And I prefer, obviously, Pauline, you talked about empowerment. I love the idea of agency because that is something that is created where people can take risks, where they can speak out, where there is a kind of knowledge and understanding that what people are doing is for the greater good in terms of what we have agreed is right for our children and young people. Whereas empowerment can be taken away or given, but it's still very much the head teacher, I think, that owns that power in terms of an empowerment agenda. So agency can exist, or an agentic culture can exist, when there is a commonly agreed purpose, where we are looking critically at the work that we do. If you're looking at ACEL data, how does that influence how children spend their time in primary schools? And we looked at some timetables in our enhanced political awareness course, and we found that there were 6 periods of numeracy, or 6 hours of numeracy, 6 hours of literacy, and then music was once a fortnight as an add-on. So it's looking really critically at our work and thinking about, well, how does that support or undermine human flourishing that we have agreed is the right of every child in terms of the UNCRC? So I've probably not answered your questions, but I think the more of the critical conversations that you have based on research and knowledge and children's voices being part of that, the better the decisions that we can make and the more that we can challenge the policies that don't support the flourishing that we want for our children and young people.
Thanks, Alison. For me, there's something about trusted teaching in this, trusted teaching influencing some of this space and being seen to influence. Asif, is there anything that you would offer back to Scott's question?
I think what's interesting for me in the question is how do you leverage with your values? And for me, there's a very important distinction that it's not just values and it's not necessarily personal values, it's professional values. So whenever we mention values in the standards, we almost always in the standards have the word professional in front of it. And I think that in itself is an important part of leverage, because when we look at the different sets of standards, from the standard for provisional registration to the standard for headship, there are different areas of it which look different from one standard to the other. The exception to that is the professional standards. They are identical no matter which standard you're looking at, whether you're a head teacher or if you're someone who's a provisionally registered teacher. And there's something important about that, about reminding our colleagues that those are shared values and they're not personal values, they are professional values that bind us as a profession. And I think, again, I'd go back to trust. I think part of trust is knowledge and understanding, skills and ability. I have very little knowledge and understanding of the primary one curriculum or assessment, so I won't go into that. But I think that some of these questions, actually, when you strip other elements away, they come down to not being political decisions. They're actually ethical decisions. So another thing that I would mention would be to use our tools, which are the professional standards, yes, but COPAC as well, our Code of Professionalism and Conduct, and that's a document that helps us make ethical and professional decisions. So that can be a tool that we use to help these really thorny and contentious decisions as well.
Thanks, Asif. I think that's really interesting. I think Alison would like to come back in. Come on, Alison.
Just very quickly.
Another idea.
No, just very quickly. We've had a number of conversations about professional and personal values with those that are on our ethical leadership programme, and I agree that all of these discussions are about ethics in terms of professional ethics. And can our professional values be different to our personal values if we are an ethical leader? Because we look at identity and growth and development of all of our teachers and our leaders. And there is a question, which is probably another debate, around whether our professional values and personal values can be different.
That's a really interesting debate to have. Maybe not in the last 9 minutes of our time together today, Alison, but yeah. And I think, Scott, there's something for me that just speaks to something very foundational in your question. What is education for? And does it change? So does our view as a P1 teacher or as a person in an early learning and childcare centre, does the view of the purpose of education change as a youngster gets older? And I think there's something dead interesting in that. And there's if you can Google this, you will find a really old and interesting lecture from the 1950s. A guy, McMurray, gave a lecture in Murray House. And he said, the purpose of education, I'm paraphrasing badly, the purpose of education is to learn to be a good human and to thrive in community with others. And there's something just fundamental about, I know we've done lots of work as a nation on our vision, but are we all really signed up to the same purpose? Scott, has that in any way been helpful to you?
No, definitely. I think it's really interesting because it's something that maybe again argued within the policy. There's like neoliberal tendencies, and again, just what's the actual aspiration? Again, you could argue it's contradictory sometimes. So no, it's very interesting to take it from that ethical perspective. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Lovely to meet you. And look out for stuff from us. We've got a bit on our website about ethics, and we're going to be doing some more work to that in 2025. So there'll be stuff coming out that you might find interesting. Let's
Brilliant,
try
thank you.
Lilith and see if Lilith can hear us all right. Are you there, Lilith? Would you like to ask your question? I'm not sure, Fraser, if Lilith's hearing
No,
us.
I can step in for Lilith and pose
Please
her
do,
question
that'd be
for her. Hopefully
great.
she's not being frustrated by Teams functionality or something like that. Yeah. So the question that Lilith has posted for us is, for aspiring middle leaders, should understanding and demonstration of political insight play a role in an application? And if so, how is this best achieved?
In an application, do we think, Fraser, meaning a job application?
I would imagine so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So any thoughts on that one? Asif, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, so I suppose I should say that the application process and recruitment process is a matter for employers, so they'll decide what questions they want to ask in applications. Many do, I think, use the standards as a kind of infrastructure or a framework for some of their recruitment activity. And I think that often one of the questions that's explored when aspiring leaders and middle leaders are going through a recruitment process is, have you led an innovation or a change within your area, and how did that go? And of course, that's partly about leadership, of course it is, but I absolutely think that there's opportunity there to demonstrate political insight. And if we go back to those 4 words that I had, so power, if you can credibly account for an innovation or change that you've made, you can describe who the people were that had the power and what you did to work with them and influence them, how you exerted influence and how successful you were, and whether you shared it or not. Policy was the other key word, how you led that and how you developed the policy to give life to the change that you want to make. And trust, you brought your colleagues along with you. They had trust in you because of your expertise and your credibility, and you maybe had a infrastructure for evaluating the change that meant that people had trust that if it wasn't working, then you wouldn't persist with it. So I think there's a lot there.
Thanks, Asif. That's actually what I think you've given people as a nice framing for how to collect some of your experience and achievements in an application context. You could use that sort of as a framework. Alison, any thoughts for Lilith?
Yes, I agree with what you said, Asif, there as well. And I would also say, as a head teacher who has interviewed many, many, many people, it'll very much depend on the head teacher and what they're looking for. But I would definitely want to see a critical stance around education in your application form. So there are often sections about inclusion or meeting learners' needs or curriculum. And I would want to see a critical understanding of where we are in the Scottish context around what are the challenges to assessment, to curriculum, and how you view these and how you would continue to lead with optimism and with all of the kind of, to influence with optimism, with understanding, with critique, in order to make sure that you were doing the best for the children and young people. So that kind of doesn't necessarily need to be called a political stance, but it is with a small p, because we're all, public servants, if you like, and we need to be sure that we understand the situation and the context that we are coming into as leaders in order that we can lead ethically and wisely and with knowledge of what the challenges are. So I would expect to see something like that in an application form that shows that you understand education, you understand the challenges, and also the influence that you can have and that you will have as a middle leader or as a senior leader if you're a middle leader applying for a senior leader's post.
Thanks, Alison. I'm going to round up very shortly because we're 3 minutes away from our closing time, and we like to finish bang on time. And I'm very good at that, and I don't want to spoil my record, is what I'm saying. So I'm going to ask in a minute, Alison and Asif, if there's anything that you want to say that you haven't had the chance to say this afternoon. But before I do that, I just want to say thanks to both of you. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for recording the video in advance, which I'm sure some folk will be going back to revisit and think about these issues a bit more. I think you need to do some deep thinking about this stuff that requires repeat visits around about some of these concepts. So I'll come to you first, Alison. Is there anything that you just want to say to finish off this afternoon?
Just, it is, leadership in education is difficult and it's challenging, and it's worth it, and it's about putting yourself out there to really try and understand and critique so that you don't have that idea of the moral compass spinning. So to challenge and influence in every positive way possible, but with knowledge and understanding of the context and what would support or undermine your practice as an ethical leader.
Yeah.
And to understand what that means for you. And I talk a lot about leadership identity, and whether you're a middle leader, middle leader, aspiring deputy head teacher, it's understanding who you want to be, what others would say about your courage and critique of what's not working for children, and make sure that you embody that in your actions, your interactions, and in the wisdom of the decisions that you make.
And I think, Alison, that's a great point, because I think sometimes people feel that the professional standards want people to be the same and be the same kind of leader. And we don't, that's not what they're there to do. They're there to help you as an individual leader find who you are and what your growth is in that. Asif, any closing remarks before we say goodnight?
Just that the standard for middle leadership is obviously still a relatively new standard, and I suppose my message would be encouraging people to dive into it, become more familiar with it. I think it's a really interesting standard that sometimes I think middle leaders will read the standard and they'll see themselves in it, and sometimes they'll read the standard and they'll see what they aspire to reach. And so that would be my closing remark, would be engage with the standard for middle leadership and become familiar with it, because there's a lots of support there for us as middle leaders.
Great, excellent call to action at the end from Asif. And all I want to say is teaching is complex work. It is rooted in relationships of authority, trust, power, and there is an ethical understanding to what it means to be a teacher. That is why we have these professional standards that Asif is commending you to go and explore in a little bit more depth. So being a middle leader in this complex world of teaching in schools, which are complex places, is all going to be complex. So one of the other things to do as well as get in about the standard and really try to understand deeply aspects of it is get to know some other middle leaders, network, and get to, you know, speak to people who do similar work to you and share and learn. And I'm going to leave it there because it's 5 o'clock and I don't go overtime on a 5 o'clock on a Tuesday night. So thanks to all of you for coming. We've really enjoyed having you here. I hope you found that helpful. Big thanks to Alison and to Asif. And you will catch up with all of this on our website should you wish to revisit any of the themes. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye.